Yo, what's happening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages? It is your hostess with the mostest. It is PKR, Pastor Keenan Riley, and we are here on People Suck, Love Them Anyways. And we thank you for tuning in. Thank you for hitting that download button. And as always, if you couldn't tell by his nasal,
My nasal?
yeah, I heard you go. I heard you do it. Yeah, I heard you
Probably.
do a little
Yeah.
nasal sniff over there. I
Make
am
sure everybody knows
joined.
I'm here.
Yeah, there you go. I'm joined by my sidekick, Nicky Nick. So, Nick, how we doing today? How we living, man? It's Sunday. It's kind of pretty outside today, man. Been a beautiful week here in Kentucky. I feel
Beautiful
like
week for sure. Yeah. Shoot. I mean, I hate the winter. So like it's been wonderful.
any
It's like
type of
70 something.
sunshine, man.
70 sunshine, 70 something degrees.
What if Christians hated sin so bad that just a little bit of the goodness of God, man, would make them thankful?
Yeah, right? I know. It's just what if? You know, what if?
We live in a what if world
Yeah,
today,
we do.
man.
We do live in a what if world because it's just like a 70-degree day doesn't carry me over for the rest of the year.
Right.
Just like a little bit of God's grace doesn't carry most people over.
This is true. Like you're like, it gets to a point of where we have these like nice things called pools, and rivers and lakes, and we like to get out, we like to do things, and you can't really get in those on 70-degree days. So, like you said, whenever it's 70, it's like I'm thankful that it's not 30, but I know that I'm looking forward to summertime because summertime means pulling back the cover on the pool. It means swimming. It means some kind of water sports. It means something going on, So I think that's a good analogy right there about how God's grace, a lot of times, it's like we get a little bit of God, but it's like, oh man, it's like, there's a dangerous line of I feel like being grateful but still wanting more. I think you should want more. I think you should expect more from God. But maybe there are those people out there that are living in those 70-degree grace periods of God, where it was like, oh, I'm just happy it's not 30. Right. Who cares if it ever gets to 90?
I think we talked about it a couple of weeks ago, where it's like, are you really blessed? We sit there and look around and we're like, oh, I've got roof over my head, food to eat, clothes to wear. I'm blessed, but then you live every day like you're not. It's just like, you're miserable.
Yeah,
it's like I find myself even, praying to God, be like, yeah, God, I'm thankful for what I have. I really am. I'm thankful for what you provided me with, all that kind of stuff. But God, I wish it was better. It's just like I wish things were a little bit better.
Well,
I'm thankful for it.
Well, it's kind of like having, again, you go back to having that pool. I think of a pool like of like just another added on layer of blessings that God could give somebody. And you have this pool, and it's like, but I can't really get the full benefit of the pool until it's really hot outside, so the pool feels good. And so I kind of feel like God is the same way, like where He's got this blessing, He's got this abundance stored up and waiting. But it's like I need you to get to a certain aspect, a certain point of where you can, a certain season of where you can actually use it and it be as productive as what I meant for it to be. And man, I tell you, I mean, like, if you stay stuck in a season long enough, then it's just it's I don't know, man. Like there's just so much in the world. I think about spring, summer, winter, fall, where I love summer. I love spring too, but I'm a summer fan. I mean, I love the heat. I love the sun. I don't like the bugs. I don't like that. Don't like the mosquitoes. Don't like the wasps. Don't like things like that. But I just love I love the daylight thing. You know how it goes, stays daylight till 9, 10 o'clock at night. I love swimming. I love the pool. I love the sun. I love things like that. But it's like even staying in that season, you get tired of it, but it's like certain things in this area won't grow. Certain things in this area, would die off. I mean, like, you take like Florida, I think like or Hawaii or like that southern tropical area type deal, where there's only certain things that will grow in that area because of the humidity, because of the temperatures and things. Yeah, because of things like that. Where up here it's totally different because it's like we experience all four seasons, and there's a cycle that happens where if down in Florida or Hawaii or Mississippi, whatever, Louisiana, like I'm thinking of places like that, like southern Texas, where it's like if you even mention the word snow down there, people are like, oh my God, they're freaking out. Like I learned it's I don't know if it's Alabama or maybe if it's even on down further south, but there's some states that don't even have like salt trucks. And and it's like because they're not prepared for things like that because that season never happens. And I think there's some spiritual aspect to be able to look at that and be like, sometimes we're not prepared for stuff because it's like we don't know if we'll ever go through that season. And it don't always have
expecting to go through
right,
that
right,
season.
right. And it don't always have to be bad. I mean, you can look on the good side of things and be like, sometimes I don't think you're prepared to handle the blessing because you didn't think that season would come, and so you're not prepared. You're not ready to grasp what God is wanting to give you. And we talked about that today a lot in our message over in Deuteronomy 8. That Moses was like he was telling this new era, this new age of Israelites about the promised land that they were getting ready to go into. And he was basically just saying like, hey, look, like there's going to be a lot of good stuff in there. Like there's going to be some really good stuff, basically everything that you need. But I also want to remind you of who God was when you didn't have jack squat. I want to remind you that God hooked you up in the wilderness every day with something to eat and something to drink. That your sandals never wore out, that your clothes never got rugged, that for 40 years that God took care of you. And so whenever you enter into this new season, don't you forget what God did, because if you do, I didn't read the whole scripture today, but Moses was saying if you do forget, your heart is going to swell with pride because you're going to think that you accomplished everything. You're going to think that you done everything, and then that is going to lead you directly into sin, and sin can keep you stuck in a season way longer than what you're supposed to be in it.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy to think, the Israelites, we talked just now about how, they were always provided for, they had everything they needed to survive.
Right.
And a lot of people would look at that like their lives today. You can look around your life today and be like, well, I'm thankful I have everything I need to survive.
Yeah.
But that next season of your life that's waiting for you to get out of your comfort zone and to leave the current season, that next season of your life may be better. It may be the land of milk and honey. It may be blessings and provisions beyond what you currently have. But a lot of people would just get so stuck and think, this is as good as it's going to get.
Yeah.
This is everything I'm ever going to have. This is, at least I'm provided for. I may not be happy, joyful every single day, but you have to be willing. The Israelites had to be willing to step into the promised land.
Right.
And as we saw, before Deuteronomy, they had a hard time doing that because of
True.
fear, and all that, and they had to wait for 40 years wondering. But during those 40 years, they were provided for, taken care of, yada yada yada. And so it's a twofold process. God will give it to you, but you have to be willing to step into it.
Yeah.
You have to be willing to leave the season behind and move into the next season.
Yeah, and that's where we get. So I know the Bible says to be content in every circumstance, and I get that we should be content. But it's again, if we stay content in every circumstance, then it's man, it's like we stay stuck in the circumstance. And it's I think we maybe misinterpret that verse a little bit, where it's just because you're grateful in it doesn't mean that you should stay in it. It's just because you're grateful for a season doesn't mean that you should stay stuck in that season for forever, and it's that's where we really have to kind of grasp hold of what God is trying to do, or what God is like I was telling the church today, a lot of the times the wilderness is what God is trying to work out of you. It's not what God is trying to teach you. It's not what God is trying to show you. It's what God is trying to work out of you. And for the children of Israel, it was a unrepentant heart, but it was also this submissiveness that we were talking about. They were so hard-headed, and they were so if God would tell them to take a step left, they would go right. If God told them to bow down, they would stand up. They were always so intrigued. I feel it's probably a bad word, but they were just so dead set on doing the wrong thing. And it's why? If you would just listen, just listen for a few seconds to what God would tell you to do. And I get it. It's I told the church today, Nick, I said, we would the church, the church the churches, the Christians that we claim to be in 2025 today, we would not have survived the wilderness. We wouldn't have. We would have been the Israelites 2.0 because it's we freak out. We freak out when McDonald's closes early, or we freak out whenever it's oh, I opened up the cabinet and there's nothing to eat, so let me go get something to eat. And so it's could you imagine waking up every morning trusting God that He was going to provide something to eat for that day? when you didn't have nothing to eat? Could you imagine, waking up every morning trusting that God was going to provide you with water? Could you imagine waking up every morning and you don't have a set home? You don't have, you had a set destination, but it seemed like it was taking forever to get there. And like, could you imagine living like that, but yet being able to say, "Oh, I trust you, God. I love you, God. God's got a good plan for my
Mhm.
life. God's taking care of me. God's like we as Christians today, bro, we would have never made it.
No,
We we would have never made it.
I think we neglect how long that is. Like I think it's so easy for us as Christians, in 2025, to read the Bible and say, oh yeah, they wandered for 40 years.
Yeah,
It's just like, oh, it just slides off the tongue, and
yeah,
we don't stop
right.
and think about how impatient we get with God in 6 months.
Yeah,
Like,
6 minutes,
yeah, 6 days,
6
whatever.
days. Yeah,
I'm like, we get impatient when we don't see an answer. We don't see the promised land. We don't see the next season. We don't
Mhm.
see the next relationship. We don't see the next job. We don't see the next whatever, right, in a year. Just
Mhm.
take 1 year.
Yeah,
And, the Israelites had to be content for 40.
yeah,
They had to be content for 40.
yeah,
And I said, it's crazy because it doesn't describe, the Bible doesn't describe in detail all 40 years.
right.
And it's crazy because like I said, I know the moments that I get tired of waiting for something. That I'll be like, I know there's something coming next month, and God, I can't wait till it gets here.
Mhm.
And like you're just like these Israelites are like, we have to wait 40 years.
Right.
Like it's just like how finicky we are over just within 1 year. How finicky our faith is in just 1 year.
Yeah,
And to think like how these Israelites had to keep that faith, maintain that faith, and have that hope that in 40 years they're gonna finally reap the benefits of all of this wandering.
I think about like in this modern day that we have vision boards.
Mhm.
Vision boards where it's like you're going to put everything that you want to see happen in 2025 on this vision board, and you're going to make it possible. And then like, what happens if it doesn't happen?
Mhm.
And then in 26, it's like, oh, we're doing a different vision board, and we have different things, and now we're going to have to get around different people, and and it's like I want you to go back and put yourself in the Israelite shoes for a second. They didn't get around different people. They didn't have different visions. They didn't have different things. Like it was like they literally had to trust. They had to trust and had to have faith that every morning when they woke up that they were going to be provided for that day. And yes, they were not perfect. Like in fact, the Bible says that a whole generation of doubt and unbelief had to die off before they entered into that promised land. Why? Because as like the Holy Spirit was speaking to me today about, it's like if you don't deserve a God of promises, if you can't worship a God who allows problems.
Mhm.
And I think that's something like where we have to really start speaking to ourselves about, where it's like God allows things for a reason. I don't know what that reason is. I mean, he's God. I mean, he transcends time. I mean, God sees next week, next month, next year. Like God sees all of that. So for us, like I don't understand why things are happening in my life today. Some of it is choice,
Mhm.
okay? Like some of it is bad decision and things like that. But some things are changing, transforming, shifting, happening right now that I do not understand in this moment. But like 5 years down the road,
Mhm.
10 years down the road, God is like, hey, I did this now for then, or whatever the
Oh yeah.
case is. And for me, it's like I have to really again lean into that process and be like, what is transpiring right here in front of me right now is one season, but I can't stay stuck in this season, because if I do, then what is happening 5 years down the road will be filtered through that season, and it'll be
Mhm.
filtered through what I've experienced. And if that's the case, then who knows? Like if it was a bad season that I was in, and then God brings something good, I'll still filter it through that bad season. And if I filter it through that bad season, Nick, like I might be costing myself a lot. I might be looking at it the wrong way.
Yeah, and it's important, I think, to think about. It's interesting. I guess I'll put it this way, because the Bible tells you, not to worry about tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, don't worry about won't worry about tomorrow. Today
Today
has
has
enough
enough
worries.
worries.
Yada yada yada.
Yeah.
We all, I say that just because we all know that. We've
Right.
heard it.
Right.
We've said it. If you've been in church, you've heard it. You've said
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
But then you also kind of stop and you think, if what you have to remember at the same point in time, that you have to remember that the worries of today, they have I'll say consequences for tomorrow.
Right.
You know, like the things you're going through today are either to teach you something, to take something away from you, or to give you something that you're going to need tomorrow.
Yeah.
That you're going to need in that next season. Not to say tomorrow is, because tomorrow isn't promised. But generally, it's believed as you say, the quote unquote super Christians. They're like, this trial that I'm going through right now, God has a way out. God's going to provide a way out.
Yeah.
The weapon may have been formed, but it will not prosper.
It will not prosper.
And we tell ourselves that a lot, but it is important, I think. And it is odd. Keenan and I talk, and we before the podcast talk a lot about some different things in the Bible that can give off a contradictory kind of viewpoint and things like that. Because it's like the Bible says not to worry about tomorrow. And then, but we're sitting here and we're going through something, and we believe through faith that what we're going through now is going to give us a better life tomorrow.
Right.
Or down the road 5 years from now, whatever.
Or we get life insurance.
All right. Yeah, we do. We do buy life insurance.
We're
worried about
because we're worried about tomorrow,
even though we're not supposed to be.
And what kind of future will you create for your kids? And it's like, well, biblically speaking, I'm not worried. I shouldn't worry about tomorrow because that's what the Bible says. So if I don't make it, then you know what, my kids will be fine.
Yeah, and
God will provide.
And then I think you can even roll that back into being content in the present moment, being thankful for what you have right now.
Yeah.
Not worried about what God, and maybe not being worried about what God will bless you with in 5 years. Being thankful for what you have now. If God decides to bless you 5 years from now, if God decides to get you out of this mess in a week or 2 weeks or a month, that's great. But I shouldn't worry about when He's going to get me out. I should be happy in the moment.
Right.
And you can kind of go back and forth a little bit on that. I think everybody kind of reads that, translates it maybe a little bit differently as to how they should. I mean, I think it's important to be content in the present moment. I think it's important to have hope and faith for the future. I think it's also important to protect your peace. If you get so worried and anxious about what's going to happen tomorrow, are we going to enter a nuclear war? Are we going to go into a recession? Are we going to do this? Are we going to have this? I don't think that's healthy. I don't think that's healthy to worry about. Right. And I don't think you should be so caught up in, life is going to be so much better tomorrow. It's going to be so much better next week. It's going to be so much better next year. It's going to be so much better in 30 years. You shouldn't be so caught up in worrying about that. I think you should enjoy the day.
Right.
Enjoy each day. Do what you can to enjoy the moments. Don't be so caught up in, I'm going to suffer. We've talked about this on the podcast. I'm going to struggle and I'm going to suffer today so I can have tomorrow.
Right.
Don't do that either.
Right.
You want to make sure you are content, you are enjoying life in the present moment because you aren't promised tomorrow.
Right.
Have hope and a faith that if God gives you a tomorrow, it has the chance and possibility of being better than today.
Right.
But still being thankful for the day and in the moment.
Well, I think kind of that's what Moses was trying to reiterate to the children of Israel, that it's all about a heart posture. It's all about a heart position that, God was still God in the wilderness whenever you had nothing. And guess what? God is still in control when He gives you this land and it has everything. So whether you have everything or whether you have nothing, like God is still God. He's still consistent. He doesn't change. We change like every second of every day. We change. But God is who He says He is. And for us to inherit those blessings, it's like, but to me, if we inherit those blessings, then again, we have to be consistent with our worship to God in the wilderness, because oftentimes He is trying to work things out of us. And whether that is stubbornness, disobedience, whether that's a bad heart posture, whatever the case is, it's like we despise the wilderness so much. And we feel like maybe I feel like this, that the wilderness is a punishment sometimes. And it's not. It's like, no, it's not a punishment. It's literally God bringing you from point A to point B, but He's taking you through a trial process of where He's trying to refine you so that when you get to point B, you're better than when you left point A. And I think that's where, like, me and Nick, again, we talk a lot outside of the podcast. Like, we joke, but it's true. Like, we could probably film 3 podcasts with the stuff that we talk about after service, before the podcast, and then in the podcast. Like, we could probably do that and we could probably, Nick, tape once a month and still make 4 podcasts, probably.
Right.
If we
that would be a lot more
efficient. I feel like for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be good, man. And then people who actually watch on YouTube would be like, why are they wearing the same clothes every week?
Yeah,
every week they're the same thing, man. So, like, we're taking up funds now for clothes because Keenan and Nick never change, evidently. They just wear the same clothes all month. But yeah, I mean, so we, like, whenever we talk about stuff beforehand, it's like we're talking about things that dive real deep into the Bible and real deep into not really like questioning God, but it's like, trying to understand more of what we're reading, more of what we believe, and more of what help me, God, to evolve my understanding of you, of what we're doing, of what we're trying to do here, and things like that. And if I don't have a right heart position, because the enemy's crafty like this, if I don't have the right heart position to receive, if I don't have the right heart position to have these conversations and grow from them and take them to not only edify the kingdom, to build the kingdom, but to help my relationship with them. Like, if I take this and being like, man, I tell you what, like, that's kind of just turned me against my relationship, or man, now I really don't agree with this. Let me go against this, or whatever the case is. Like, if I take that stance and the enemy can move in like that, then my heart position's not right. And like I told my church today, I said, if you're only praying and worshiping God for what He can give you, then and when you receive it, you stop praying and worshiping. Then you never wanted it for the right reasons. You didn't want it to build the kingdom. You didn't want it to edify His name. You didn't want it to bring Him glory. You wanted it to get you out of the situation you were in. Mm-hmm. So that exemplifies, selfishness and things like that, self-centeredness, and so it's like you got to really step back and understand that I feel like at the base level of Christianity, it's heart position, it's heart placement, and the posture.
It's not about you,
right? Well, yeah, 1,000%. That it's like you are supposed to unselfishly abandon all the thought concepts that you have of life and how to live life, and you're supposed to gravitate towards what this Bible says that you're supposed to be doing, which is basically seeking a relationship with Him to provide unselfish care for everyone else around you. And so that's why, like, people, I feel like, have a hard time gravitating towards Christianity a lot, because we paint this picture of, well, it's you and God.
Right.
And it's like, it is to a certain extent, but it's not meant for you to just be you and God. Mm-hmm. It's actually meant for it to be you and God, but you helping other people get to God, type situation, and by any means necessary, really. Like, if you look at the sacrifice that everybody's put in, if you go and read the Bible and look at the sacrifice that everybody done, like, we fail in comparison, to what we do. I mean, like, we're, me and Nick, like, we'll talk about doing a podcast, and it's like, oh man, I stayed for an hour and done a podcast. It's like, oh, whoo, sorry, sir. You talked into a mic for an hour and tape so you could put it out there, and hopefully somebody would hear about Jesus. Like, we had guys getting beat up and thrown in prison, getting whipped and chained and handcuffed and everything else. And
naked.
Yeah, like, getting made fun of, ridiculed, everything else. And it's like they just got back out there and started preaching the gospel again, So for us,
drained after one service.
Yeah. Oh man. And it's like you talk, you hear those guys that, like, oh, we done 5 services today. I preached 5 times, and stuff was like that. And it's like, man, I'm just wore out. I'm exhausted, mental health. And it's like, where was mental health back in Acts? Like, right. Whenever people were getting the holy hell beat out of them and in prison, and literally their mindset was, I got to do more for Jesus. Mm-hmm. Like, I got to do more for Jesus. Like, where did that mindset go? Like, where today, where it's like, well, like, we need you. It has to be that. Like, it literally has to be that, where our heart position is not geared towards building the kingdom. It's building our kingdom. It's funneling everything that God would do. And literally, like, whenever Moses was talking to the Israelites, Nick, I feel like he was talking to us. Mm-hmm. I feel like he was talking to modern day Christianity 2025. It's like, oh man, now you have buildings, and now you have lights, and now you have cameras, and now you have parking lots, and now you have ministries, and now you have global ministries, and now you have websites, and now you have podcasts, and you got all of this good stuff, and it's like, we have forgotten, bro, that God was still God before we had any of this whatsoever. You know what I mean? And like, that's where we just fail at a lot, I feel like, as Christians, where it's like, if where God is God if we have more.
Yep. It's like we have to have things fit into our box of what it's supposed to look like, sound like, be like. If it doesn't serve us, then it's for naught. It's like we had the conversation. It's like you walk into a church. I'll phrase it this way. You walk into a church, and there's 15 people up here for worship, and but then the next Sunday you walk in and there's 3.
Yeah.
It's like, you should, if your heart position is truly to worship God, you should be able to worship God regardless of if we're watching YouTube videos. Like if you're watching YouTube videos at church praising God through the radio, or if you're praising God with 3 people on stage, 15 people on stage, whatever, rotating worship teams, whatever it is that you have, it doesn't matter if you play hymnals, doesn't matter if you play, the contemporary songs, doesn't matter if it's Brandon Lake and Jelly Roll or if it's whoever.
Right.
You should be able to worship God and trust and rely, and your heart position should be towards God. It shouldn't matter how many people are on the stage. It shouldn't matter what the pastor's wearing that day, or which pastor it is. You're learning from God. You're there for God. You're there for other people. You're not there to serve yourself. Like it's that's where we get things so backwards. I've had conversations with the kids, the youth on Wednesday nights, Sunday nights. We've been talking about King Saul. We've been talking about Jonah. We've been talking today. We were in Matthew, I think 26. The Garden of Gethsemane. We talked about how the differences between Jesus and Saul and Jonah. I talked about how, like with Saul and Jonah, they refused to obey God. They wanted to do things their way. Saul and Jonah were both fairly selfish in that regard. Jonah ran away because he hated the Ninevites so much. He didn't want to go do what God wanted him to do. He wasn't thinking about the Ninevites. He was thinking about himself.
Of course.
And then you take Saul, for example, who, his whole life, almost his whole life after being king, he was selfish, he was self-serving, he was hateful, he was arrogant, he was egotistical, and then he became jealous, and then he became rage-filled, and then, he consulted with a medium. And in 1 Samuel 28, it talks about how Saul, he saw the Philistine army and he was terrified, and so he prayed. So he was fearful, and this is where I told Keenan earlier. I said, the Bible, you have to really read and pay attention to how things happen in order.
Yeah.
It says in the Bible that Saul was terrified first, then he went to God.
Right.
And so what you read there is that Saul didn't come to God because that was what he was supposed to do. He came to God because he was afraid. He came to God because he wanted God to save him from these Philistines. He didn't come to God to help other Jonah. He wasn't worried about the Ninevites. He was worried about himself. But then you see Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. He was like, God, I know this is going to suck. I know that what I'm about to face is not going to be fun. It's going to hurt. It's going to be horrible. But I'm still going to trust in your will. And
well,
that's
said,
where we see the difference.
he said, Lord, your will, not mine. God, your will, not mine. And that's where, I tell you, we've just gotten so comfortable. In everything that we do. It's like we have made this promised land, and it's like, oh well, wait a minute, is God still God if is God still God if, and you can go throw in all different situations and scenarios there, but it's like the answer is yes. God is still God, no matter what scenario or
Even
situation.
if it's one of the songs we listened
right yeah, that we sang today, even if you're feeling the worst in the world, he's still God. Even if you're sick, he's still God. Even if you're broke, he's still God. Even if I wish people would understand that. No matter even if you play
a tough pill to swallow.
Oh my God. Even if you played 3 fast songs today, well, I like the worship songs. He's still God. Shut up. Even if you read from the NLT and not the KJV, he's still God. Shut up. This is the stuff that we really as Christians today get into. And I enjoyed preaching. I enjoyed preaching every Sunday, man. But I really felt like a passion inside of me as I was trying to convey the message today to people. Just with this reminder of whether you're in the wilderness or the promised land, he's still God, and we shouldn't forget that. No matter what the situation is. But again, we've grown so comfortable with life. We've grown so comfortable with our Christian walk that it's if you tell people we are no longer going to be in this building, we are having service outside all summer long. It's going to be hot. There's going to be bugs. There's going to be all this stuff going on. Your attendance would drop automatically. Bam, automatically, snap of a finger. Why? Because
they can get that convenience elsewhere.
Yeah, because you know what? There's air conditioning. There's indoor comfortableness. Plumbing. There's indoor plumbing. There's it's a lot more predictable. So it's we're gonna lose people like that. Why? Because we've grown comfortable. There's so many different scenarios that you could throw out there. And it's literally because I feel like that as a church today that we have to go back and we have to read that and have to remind ourselves that Like God has given us everything we need at our fingertips, at our disposal to be successful. But a lot of times we've lost sense of that God is the one who gave it to us, and that God can take it away, or that that it wasn't us that provided this. Like it was like Jesus. Like we just get like I told people the other day, like nobody is irreplaceable ever, nowhere. Like it doesn't matter. Like I mean, yes, the United States has been up and down for the last 300 years, but you know what? Like every 4 years, there's a presidential election, and somehow or another, we've kept going as a nation for the last like 300 years, 200 years, whatever.
Communist yet.
Yeah, we're striving. But no, I mean, like like nobody is irreplaceable. Okay, like what it boils down to is that if the people who fill in the position, who pick up the pieces or whatever, if they're going to be willing to do it with a heart position towards God, and if they do it with a heart position towards God, then God's going to use that. Like God's going to bless that, and God's going to do that. So like whenever Moses was bringing Joshua out, and he was like, I need to pray for you. I need to anoint you. Like if we were in 2025 Christianity, there would be people that would be like, I'm leaving the group because Moses is no longer the leader. I don't like Joshua. Joshua's young. He's kind of like unpredictable, and like, I just don't know how he's going to lead us. So, I'm not going to, like, there would be people who would sacrifice the promised land because Moses wasn't leading. That's 2025 Christianity.
I mean, there were Israelites. I mean, that's the same. I mean, there were Israelites who were willing and ready to go back into slavery because they didn't agree with how things were being handled.
Right, exactly. And it's like, and that is like the mentality that we still struggle with today. But yet we read the Bible like it's a history book, and it's like, no, bro, it is literally like present day situations playing out right before you. Like there are people who are like, you know what? This whole living for God thing, as I told my church today, is hard. It is difficult. Like it is difficult. If you truly live for God, try to do the right thing, try to be a good person, try to treat everybody right, try to pray for everybody, try to turn the cheek, try to forgive, try to not bat an eye, try to not be angry, try to not be aggressive. Like if you try to do all of that stuff, bro, it's hard. It is difficult. And that's the reason why a vast majority of people would rather go back to the lifestyle that they were living, to the things that they were doing beforehand, and be like, you know what? Like I tried that. It's too hard. It's too crazy. Like I would rather just be in this situation. I'd rather be just stuck in the middle of this situation. And that's why so many people go back. That's why so many people have that mindset. And for us, it's like, man, it's like we need to read stuff like Exodus, like Deuteronomy. Like we need to read stuff in the Bible like that to remind us, to be like, hey, yo, look, like, God has always thought ahead. That's the part that like I could get into hours on this stuff, man. That it blows my mind that people have 0 degrees of faith, like 0 level of faith when it comes to God and tomorrow. Like we already put we already put expiration dates on stuff that God hasn't even put a begin date on yet. Like what are we doing right now? And you don't think for a second God didn't see it coming? You don't think for a second God didn't plan something out? And we are so quick to be like, oh man, like that's it. That's the end of the rope. That's it. Like it'll never. Why? Because that's what you see in your mind? Because that's what you believe in your mind? Because that's the faith level that you have? That's not the right heart position. And honestly, you don't deserve the promised land. Like you don't deserve this land flowing with milk and honey because you have a wilderness mindset still. You have a wilderness heart placement still. You would rather eat manna than to eat milk and honey. Like you would rather wander in the wilderness than let God supply you in the promised land because it doesn't make sense. And if it doesn't make sense, man, I would rather just stick with Moses. I would rather go back to Egypt, or I would rather, whatever the case is. And it's like, man, it's like if we could get our heart position towards God, we'd be dangerous. I mean, we really would. But and then like I said today at the end, like, Lord, don't send revival to the church. Send revival to the Christian. Revival to the church is just a 2-week meeting in June every year. Revival to a Christian is a fire and a passion and desire and a spirit to go change the world, or to change the person beside of them first, and if we can get that and catch that fire, then you'll see a revival. But Lord, start with us, start with me, start with you, start with us, and let us want that fire, let us want that passion, and then we'll see a change.
Yeah, exactly. And as I've been, we've talked to the youth. Like I said, it's really interesting to me today. I think a lot of people, they neglect the Old Testament, they neglect the stuff that happens in there. But that is dangerous.
Yeah.
I mean, because I was sitting there just thinking today as I was reading, in Matthew 26, and then I was comparing that back to Jonah, and then back to First Samuel, and you're seeing how this common thread, this common teaching, this common wisdom is being seen all the way through the Old Testament and the New Testament. And you can see that today.
Yeah.
I told the kids, I said, you think about Jesus and the mindset he had. He said, even though this is scary, even though this gives me, fear, anxiety, even though I don't want to be hurt, I don't want these nails shoved into me, I don't want this thorn shoved onto my head,
right.
I don't want this to happen. It's doing what God has asked you to do, regardless of how you feel.
Right.
I may feel anxious. I basically, the way I explained it to the kids was, that moment when you're sitting at church and you see, this new couple walk in, or you see this new family walk in, and you feel that thing in your stomach's like, maybe I should go talk to them. Maybe I should go greet them. Maybe I should go say hi. And then you start to rationalize and make excuses. Well, I don't think, I'll do it after service. I'll get them after service. Or, what if they make fun of me? What if they don't like what I'm wearing? What if they don't like the way I talk? What if I push them away? What if I do that? You start coming up with all these questions, all these excuses, all these what if scenarios. And then you eventually talk yourself out of doing what God has asked you to do.
Yeah.
And I said, when, we talked about this last week, but, when you do that, you have to understand that what you are doing is you are, number one, disobeying God, which is the same as witchcraft, which means you are consulting with the devil.
Mm-hmm.
When you are going, that means that instead of obeying God, you're obeying Satan. That means you are listening to his voice. You're listening to the voice of lies, deception, and manipulation. You are turning that up and turning down the voice of God, when in fact you need to do the opposite.
Right.
You need to turn up the voice of God and turn down the voice of the enemy. And so I said, in those moments, just like Jesus, he's like, Jesus is sitting there in the garden. He's like, I feel this weight on me. I feel the pain that's going to come. I feel this stuff. But God, I'm going to pray 3 times.
Yeah,
like I go to God 3 times to deal with this and pray to you, God, even if there's any other way, God, please give it to me. But if not, I will still do what you've asked me to do. And I said, in those moments when you catch yourself, as well as telling the kids today, I said in 2025, when you catch yourself making excuses as to why you shouldn't do what God is telling you to do, leading you to do, whatever, said you have to pray to God in that moment and then do it.
Right.
You don't just sit, because the longer you wait on it, the longer you sit on it, the more excuses that are going to come. Mm-hmm. I said, you may say, oh, I'm going to wait till after service, and then something comes up after service and you couldn't talk to him. So then you have to ask yourself, are you acting like Jonah? If I don't do it, who will?
Right.
If I don't go greet this person, if I don't go up to the altar and pray for this person, who will?
Right.
And what if my prayer, what if my testimony, what if my greeting this person would be all it takes to start that person on a journey towards salvation?
Yeah.
And if I didn't do it, what if nobody did it? And then that person, I have sent that person to hell because of my refusal to obey God. Mm. And, you have to ask yourself that question. You have to really, because we see this happen throughout the Bible, whether it's 1 Samuel, whether it's Jonah, whether it's Matthew, whether it's real life 2025. You see this happen throughout the Bible. It's all connected. It all works together. God meant for us to read it from beginning to end because it has things that we can get from it from beginning to end.
Right.
And we have to be able to put that stuff into action, and we have to be able to use that and be a blessing in the lives. Because again, it's not about us. God does not care about your thoughts, opinions, emotions, or feelings when he asks you to do something. Mm-hmm. God knew that Jonah hated the Ninevites, but he asked him to go there anyway to preach to him, to tell him what was happening.
Yeah.
So God doesn't care about your thoughts, feelings, or emotions. So you shouldn't let your thoughts, feelings, emotions, and opinions get in the way of doing what God has asked you to do.
Well, that's one thing that I wanted to say that I talked about on Wednesday night was the fact of that when God called Moses to be the leader of the children of Israel, it wasn't the fact that Moses could lead good. I mean, Moses was scared. Moses had a stuttering problem. Moses gave every excuse in the book not to go, actually. But what God was really looking at was his heart position, because he knew there would be a point where he would have to tell Moses that he wasn't entering the promised land, that he was going to die before he made it to the promised land, and he was going to have to anoint, pray for, and send forth Joshua in that process. And that, my friends, takes a heart position that is after the kingdom of God and not after building your own kingdom. Because, there was going to be that position. And if Moses would have rebelled in that moment, then that would have caused the children of Israel to rebel in that moment. But instead, Moses sacrificed. Moses was submissive to God, and he said, listen, I will pray for, I will anoint, and I will send forward Joshua in front of everybody. So therefore they'll know that he's going to be this newfound leader, moving forward. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot that goes into that relationship with God. There's a lot that goes into it, but I think really maybe the point that we're trying to drive home today is that the relationship with God is not about you. It's about God. Now it is about you benefiting to become a better person because of that. But whenever you get around God, whenever you hang around with God, as we said today, it's consistency. The more that you are consistent with God, the more that you will see the attributes and the blessings and the flowing and the promises and stuff like that of God, like in your life. You will see that. And so if you spend 3 minutes a week with God, you're going to have 3 minutes of faith. And then after that, your life's going to be a wreck for the other hours that you're awake. Yeah, pretty much, And so it's like it's all a consistency thing of what you're willing to put in order to get out of, and what you're investing in is something that can change your life in an entirety. Like it can change your life. It can change the outcome of your life. It can change the direction of your life. I mean, it can change your life so much, but you have to be willing to invest in that. Nick, any final thoughts?
No, yeah, and that's what I kind of left the kids today. Was just this idea that again, it's number one, it's not about us. I think in the last few stories I've talked to the kids, well, again, whether it's for Samuel, Jonah, whatever, it's all about our thoughts, feelings, and emotions don't matter. Ultimately, it's what God wants us to do that matters. It's about us being obedient. It's about us having faith and trusting that God has a bigger plan and purpose for what it is that we are doing, even though we can't see it. Jonah didn't think, I think back to Jonah, Jonah did not think that the Ninevites were going to change their ways, and he definitely didn't want them to. He wanted them to be wiped from the face of the planet.
Yeah.
And so, Jonah thought that, he didn't want to do it, so he ran away from God. God found him, and God drug him back, in the belly of a fish after 3 days, and spit him out when Jonah finally got his crap together. Right. Decided to obey God, and then Jonah went, and I don't know how many people were in the city of Nineveh. I can't remember if it says or not, but I'm thinking tens of thousands of people in this city were all saved because of one man, because of one man's act of obedience.
Right.
God gave him a second chance in the belly of that or fish, whatever you want to call it, to go and do, because again, if Jonah didn't, who would have?
Right.
And I think, not to say that God couldn't have used someone else, but, I almost want to sit there and think, God wouldn't have used someone else.
Right.
If Jonah hadn't done what he was supposed to do, then God would have destroyed the Ninevites.
Yeah.
He's a man, he's a God of his word.
Right.
And so, I think about those people that we see on a daily basis, that God gives us opportunity after opportunity after opportunity after chance to tell them about Jesus, to love on them, to show them love, grace, mercy, and forgiveness, to be a light in their lives. Yet we constantly make excuses. We constantly come up with reasons as to why we shouldn't do it or can't do it or this, that, or the other. And ultimately, it is our job and our responsibility to obey God, period.
Yep.
When he asks us to do it, no matter how we feel, no matter if we want to, no matter if we're shy or introverted or angry at him or frustrated at him, it is our job to obey God, period.
Yep.
The first time he asks us to do it, because we may not be given a second chance to do it. And if we're not given that second chance to do it, we have to ask ourselves, if we don't do it, who will?
Yeah.
If we don't pray for that person, if we don't give our testimony, if that person's not touched by what we are supposed to do, then someone may never touch that person's lives.
That's true.
And so it is up to us and our job and our responsibility. And this goes back, Keenan and I were talking about, the judgment seat of Christ, and, thinking about, what if God one day was like, I gave you a chance and opportunity to help and bless this person, and because of your lack of faith, because of your disobedience, this person is now going to spend the rest of their life, the rest of eternity in hell, because of your lack of faith, because of your lack of obedience. And so you have to ask yourself, whose lives am I costing for my disobedience? What impact, what eternal impact does my disobedience have? And it's all about, again, it's not about you, it's about other people. It's about being a blessing to other people. God may bless you in the process, but it is ultimately about being a blessing to other people.
Yeah, absolutely. So heart position matters in everything. And again, this whole relationship with God is about blessing others and about, bringing others to Christ around you. And so if that's the mentality you have, I can see where you will be highly successful. If it's all about you, then you're just buying into the consumer Christianity of 2025. So we love you so much, man. Thankful for this episode. Thankful for the ability to do it. We survived another Sunday. Amen. Amen. We still working, man. One Sunday at a time. So we're very thankful for that. And we'll keep it moving. So until we see you again, we love you and be blessed.